Continuing with today's featured Flash Talks, please welcome the President and CEO of the W.K. Kellogg Foundation, LaJune Montgomery Tabron.
Hello, everyone. I am honored to be here and have the opportunity to talk to my fellow leaders in philanthropy about racial healing and building multiracial solidarity. As I understand it, HIP joined the Juneteenth celebration. Yes. And you joined local partners, the Chicago African Americans in Philanthropy. And on that day, you exemplified what solidarity is all about. And I want to say thank you. What a powerful example of multiracial solidarity. So you're already taking action in this space. And for some of you, I know what I say today will be like preaching to the choir. But that's okay, because I know choirs sing out and share stories with many others beyond the choir. So today, I would like to share a story of my foundation's racial healing journey. And I hope it will help as you think about your own work to build solidarity across communities. For those of you who may not be familiar with the W.K. Kellogg Foundation, it's founded in 1930 and is now one of the largest philanthropic foundations in the United States. We're dedicated to supporting thriving children, working families, and equitable communities. And if every story has a hero, ours is W.K. Kellogg, our founder. When Mr. Kellogg made children his mission nearly 100 years ago, he intentionally cited children of all races. He was a man before his time. And while we work across the country and around the world, our foundation now concentrates a little more than half of our grant making in our priority places of Michigan, Mississippi, New Mexico, New Orleans, Central and South Haiti, and Southern Mexico. And embedded within all we do is a commitment to advancing racial healing and equity, developing leaders, and engaging communities in solving their own problems. Historic and systemic inequities have limited access to critical resources like healthcare, education, and affordable housing, and is not just for Black families, but for many communities in the United States. And if we can remove these systemic inequities, communities, and therefore families and children will thrive. And I realize this is no easy task. And in fact, as you know, we're witnessing intentional campaigns to weaken or even destroy DEI initiatives. And I know you've spoken a great deal about the Fearless Fund, the VC firm dedicated to funding businesses founded by women of color, which I'm sure many of you are very well acquainted with this story. And of course, you know that earlier this month, the 11th Circuit Court ruled that the fund should be temporarily blocked from issuing grants reserved for businesses owned by Black women while this case proceeds. The plaintiffs, and of course this stay, wholly ignore the deep disparities in access to capital among women of color that necessitated these programs in the first place. And this is particularly concerning for Black and Latin women entrepreneurs who, according to a recent report by McKinsey, received less than 0.5% of total U.S. venture capital. So organizations like the Fearless Fund are not trying to take opportunities away from certain groups. Instead, they are trying to level a historically unfair playing field and create equity for all. But before you can transform systems and structures, we believe that you must first transform the people within them and their hearts and their minds. So racial healing at the Kellogg Foundation, we believe, is a process for connecting and building trusting relationships. It repairs damage caused by racism and ultimately allows communities to collectively transform societal structures into ones that affirm inherent value of all people. And I can tell you, this isn't just theory. This isn't just a definition that we concocted. We support racial healing because we practice it, and we know that it works. In 2007, our board committed the foundation to becoming an anti-racist organization. And that meant that we would practice racial equity and racial healing internally to the fullest. We would no longer say the buzzwords without the actions necessary to make it real. And therefore, we had to go on a journey ourselves. We had to build a diverse board, a diverse staff, and equitable practices. And today, we actually have policies that ensure adherence to these values. And at the Kellogg Foundation, the board sets the tone for the entire organization. And at this point, I would like to acknowledge one of our trustees, Ramon Murguia, who's here in the audience, who definitely sets the tone for this work to continue. And every time a new person joins our board, we must go back to our healing circles and talk about collective commitment to Mr. Kellogg's vision and our mission to create conditions for all children to thrive. In order to dismantle the systems and structures, you must have a shared understanding of how they work and how they create inequality. This learning process creates a level of solidarity that grounds the board in this work. So recently, I want to give you an example. Recently, in a board healing circle, one of our trustees spoke up about maybe feeling unheard on specific issues. That's the level of authenticity healing requires. Personal stories, personal truths. And when this conversation began, it caused all of us on the board to pause. And we reflected on how we could ensure that everyone felt heard, acknowledged, and valued. What we determined is this requires allyship. And we all must be committed to becoming allies for one another. And by becoming allies, we would become a stronger collective voice in tackling these issues. This is a commitment that I don't believe would have happened without our intentional healing work and the healing circles that, yes, our board participates in. So at the Kellogg Foundation, we believe in the power of healing so much that we created the National Day of Racial Healing to help others access this approach to transformation. Almost 9 years ago, the foundation convened a summit and brought together leaders and scholars representing close to 150 organizations to examine how a healing-focused approach to racial equity could work in communities. We call this work Truth, Racial Healing, and Transformation. One of the byproducts of the convening was the realization that we had to do more to introduce more communities to the idea of racial healing. And so from there, the National Day of Racial Healing was born. It's held every year the Tuesday after Martin Luther King Jr. Day, and is dedicated to exploring the ongoing work of how we heal from the effects of individual and systemic racism. It's an opportunity for all Americans to connect with their neighbors, face hard truths about the way in which racism and racial inequity has shown up in their lives, and then begin to heal together. This year was our 8th and the second time we partnered with Noticias Telemundo on a Spanish language special for the National Day of Racial Healing. It examined racial equity issues and the history of racism in the United States and in the Latin community. I was honored and humbled to take part in this very real, profound, and often painful conversation about how racial healing and what racial healing means specifically in the Latin communities and the colorism that people experience. While the National Day of Racial Healing, as I mentioned, happens in January, I want to encourage all of you to start your healing journey now, whether as an individual or within your organization. If I could share one actionable piece of advice today, it would be to embrace the practice of conocimiento, which we've learned from Hector at the Compadres Network. Thank you, Hector, if you're here. At the Kellogg Foundation, we often use conocimiento conversations to begin relationship building necessary to hear each other's truths and begin a racial healing process. This is a way of acknowledging someone, hearing their story, and discovering the common humanity we all share. So in a conocimiento conversation, we start out by asking questions and allowing each other to tell their stories. And it can be as simple as asking, what is the origin of your name? What this does is allows you to learn more about a person, their journey, and the connections that you may have with someone who you may think may be different. I don't have much time, so you can learn more about conocimiento and racial healing and find all the conversation guides that we produce at dayofracialhealing.org. So I'll close today with a quote from one of the civil rights activists that I'm sure you recognize very well, when he said, "The fight is never about grapes or lettuce. It's always about people." And we've talked a lot today about racial healing, but it's important to think of the healing as a means to a human-centered end. It's the first step toward our ultimate goal, which is racial equity, which we know we desperately need in order for all children, families, and communities of every color and race to thrive. Thank you, and it's all about people.